With dozens of ISO setting options, which one should you use and when? To find out, continue watching. ISO, unlike your aperture and shutter speed, does not provide any creative options. Instead, it is used to complement the shutter speed and aperture, so you can use those two settings to achieve your creative vision. In essence, if you have a specific aperture and shutter speed in mind for a particular photo, and do not have enough light to achieve it, then you'll adjust your ISO to give you more light. Because remember, ISO amplifies the existing light, which gives you more light. But as you probably also remember, the higher the ISO, the more digital noise included in your image. So my number one recommendation is to use the lowest ISO setting possible at all times. It's only when you can't physically add more light, like with off-camera flash, with a strobe, or even candles, then you will amplify the light with a higher ISO number. So here are some guidelines to get you started, since it's impossible to give you exact settings for specific lighting situations, since the possibilities are infinite. All right, so when shooting outdoors on a bright sunny day, you'll want to use the lowest ISO available on your camera, like 100 or 200. It all depends on your specific camera. If it's partly cloudy or completely cloudy, you might have to use ISO 400 to 800, and that depends on how dark the clouds are and how much sunlight they restrict. If you're shooting indoors, you might have to use ISO 800 to 1600 or higher, again, depending on how dark it is. All right, so the following information is going to be critical for the upcoming tutorials, and that's because you're going to grab your camera and start shooting. But first, you need to grab your camera manual to find out if you have a specific feature built into your camera, and that is something called auto ISO. So auto ISO is going to make it easier for you to start taking photos now without worrying about which ISO number to use, since your camera is going to auto-magically choose the ISO for you. However, I must warn you that it's not perfect, and sometimes you may end up with a bad exposure. In future tutorials, you'll learn about exposure metering, exposure compensation, and more to get the right exposure if your camera doesn't do so automatically. Now, if you have auto ISO, refer to your camera manual to learn how to set it up, and here's how it works. All right, so depending on your camera, you should be able to set the maximum ISO setting, which will minimize the amount of digital noise based on your choice. Also, depending on your camera, you might also have the option to set the minimum shutter speed. So setting the minimum shutter speed will ensure your camera doesn't choose a speed that will cause images that are blurry. More on that coming up soon. Now, if you do not have auto ISO, refer to the guidelines provided earlier when you continue with the following tutorials, which is going to start with the creative side of apertures. So if you're ready to elevate your photographic skills even more, click right there to get started.